Ethan Cole found her under a heavy downpour, huddled in front of a closed storefront. Torn coat, shaking hands, no luggage. People passed by, looking away as if she were invisible. "You'll get sick out here," Ethan said, stopping in his tracks. She didn't answer. She just looked at him with a smile that was far too calm. Not like someone in despair. Ethan hesitated. "I have a daughter at home. I can't promise much, but you can stay the night." A long silence followed. Then she nodded. Ethan had no idea the woman he just brought home could buy this entire neighborhood if she wanted to. Ethan Cole was 36 years old, but his hands told the story of a much harder life. They were thick, calloused, and permanently stained with the faint, metallic scent of motor oil and old iron. As a mechanic in a small, independent garage, Ethan's world was defined by things he could fix: broken engines, rusted frames, and failing transmissions. But the one thing he couldn't fix was the empty chair at his dining table where his wife used to sit before she passed away 5 years ago. Since then, Ethan had become a specialist in a different field, being a single father. His 10-year-old daughter, Lily, was his entire universe. She was a bright, observant girl who had inherited her father's quiet strength. They lived in a modest house on the edge of the city, where the floorboards creaked and the heater struggled in the winter. Life was a constant climb, a series of bills and long shifts, but Ethan never complained. He had taught Lily that the measure of a man wasn't the weight of his wallet, but the length of his reach when someone else was falling. That rainy Tuesday started like any other, but the atmosphere felt heavy. As Ethan drove home from a late shift, the sky opened up in a violent deluge. The wipers on his old truck could barely keep up with the sheets of water. Just 2 blocks from his house, he saw her. A woman sitting on a damp piece of cardboard, huddled against the brick wall of a defunct bakery. Most people in the neighborhood had perfected the art of the urban blind spot. They could walk past a person in need without their pulse shifting by a single beat. But Ethan wasn't most people. He pulled his truck to the curb, the engine idling with a rhythmic chug. He stepped out, feeling the cold rain soak through his jacket instantly. "Ma'am?" he called out. She looked up. Her name was Aria Voss, though Ethan wouldn't know that for a long time. Even in the dim light of the street lamp, she didn't look like the other displaced souls Ethan had encountered. There was no plea in her eyes. There was no frantic explanation of bad luck. She looked at him with a clinical, almost detached curiosity. "You can't stay here," Ethan said, shielding his eyes from the rain. "The shelter is 6 miles away, and the buses stopped running an hour ago." She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just shivered, a violent tremor that shook her thin frame. Ethan felt a protective instinct flare up, the same instinct that drove him to work double shifts to buy Lily's school books. He knew the risks. He knew that bringing a stranger into his home was a gamble. But he also knew that if he drove away, he wouldn't be able to look Lily in the eye the next morning. "Look," Ethan said, his voice lowering. "I'm a dad. I have a young daughter at home. I don't have much, and I have to put her safety first. But I have a couch, and I have a hot meal. You can stay the night, just the night. Do we have an understanding?" Aria nodded slowly. She stood up, her movements graceful despite the shivering. As she climbed into the passenger seat of the truck, the scent of expensive, faded perfume mingled with the smell of wet wool. Ethan noticed her hands. They were dirty, yes, but the nails weren't broken. Her skin wasn't weathered by months on the street. When they arrived at the house, Lily was waiting by the window. She didn't react with fear or suspicion. She simply watched as her father led the trembling woman into the kitchen. "Lily, this is a guest," Ethan said, fumbling for a name. "She's going to stay on the sofa tonight." Lily didn't ask questions. She walked to the hallway closet, pulled out their thickest wool blanket, and handed it to Aria. "It's the warmest one we have," the little girl said softly. Aria took the blanket, her fingers brushing Lily's. For a split second, the calm mask Aria wore slipped. A flicker of something soft, something deeply human, crossed her face. She sat on the worn floral sofa, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. She watched the way Ethan moved, the way he made tea, the way he checked the locks on the doors, and the way he spoke to his daughter with a tenderness that could melt iron. She sat in the shadows of the living room, a ghost in a house of life. Ethan watched her from the kitchen, a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. He had spent his life fixing machines, and he knew when a part didn't belong in the engine. This woman didn't belong in the rain. But as he turned off the kitchen light, he pushed the thought away. Tomorrow she would be Gwen, and his quiet life would return to normal. Or so he thought. Would you have the courage to do what Ethan did? Type yes or no in the comments. Morning came with a pale gray light that filtered through the kitchen curtains. Ethan woke up early, expecting to find the sofa empty and the front door unlocked. Instead, he found the blanket neatly folded, the coffee pot already humming, and the scent of toasted bread in the air. Aria was standing by the stove, her movements efficient and practiced. "I hope you don't mind," she said. It was the first time she had spoken more than a single word. Her voice was low, melodic, and possessed a refined cadence that felt out of place in a mechanic's kitchen. "It was the least I could do for the shelter." Ethan rubbed his eyes, confused. "You didn't have to do that. I told you, just the night." "I know," Aria replied, turning to face him. She had washed her face, and without the grime of the street, her features were striking, sharp, intelligent, and radiating a quiet power. "But the rain hasn't stopped, and I find myself in a bit of a logistical complication. If I stay and help with the housework, would you consider letting me stay until the weekend?" Ethan hesitated. He looked at Lily, who had just wandered into the kitchen. The little girl's face lit up when she saw Aria. For a child who grew up without a mother, Aria was like a character from a book come to life. "Can she stay, Dad, please?" Lily asked, grabbing Ethan's hand. Ethan sighed. He looked at the leaking faucet he hadn't had time to fix and the mountain of laundry in the corner. He looked at Aria, searching for any sign of a threat. He found none. What he found instead was a woman who looked like she was hiding in plain sight. "Fine, until the weekend, but no longer." As the days passed, the dynamic in the house shifted. Aria was a mystery that refused to be solved. She didn't act like a guest. She moved with a strange, inherent authority. She cleaned the house with a surgical precision. She helped Lily with her homework, explaining complex mathematical concepts with an ease that left Ethan stunned. But it was the small details that began to alarm him. One evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table buried under a pile of medical bills and past due notices from the garage. He was stressed, his head in his hands. "You're calculating the amortization wrong," Aria said, leaning over his shoulder. Ethan looked up, startled. "The what?" "The interest on your debt," Aria said, her eyes scanning the papers with the speed of a high-end computer. "If you consolidate these 3 loans and negotiate the principal on the medical bill based on the hospital's nonprofit status, you could reduce your monthly payments by 40%. Ethan blinked. "How do you know that?" Aria paused, her expression becoming unreadable. I used to work in an office before everything went wrong." Ethan wanted to ask more, but Aria had already turned back to the dishes. The mystery deepened the next afternoon. Ethan's neighbor, a man named Miller, who was known for his sharp tongue and distrust of outsiders, cornered Ethan in the driveway. "Who's the woman, Ethan?" Miller asked, nodding toward the house. "People are talking. They say you brought in a drifter. My wife says she saw her looking at the local real estate listings on her phone." "Drifters don't have phones like that, Ethan." Ethan felt a surge of defensiveness. "She's a friend, Miller. Mind your own business." But the seeds of doubt had been planted. Ethan began to watch Aria more closely. He noticed the way she stood, back straight, chin up, as if she were used to being the most important person in a room. He noticed that she never mentioned her past, never talked about family, and never asked for money. In fact, she seemed to have a total disregard for it. One night, Lily asked the question that had been haunting Ethan. "Dad, why does Aria act like she owns the house? Not in a mean way, but like she's the boss of everything?" Ethan didn't have an answer. He felt a growing tension in his chest. He was a man who valued honesty above all else, and he felt like he was living in a house of mirrors. He decided that the coming Saturday he would have to insist she leave. The risk to his peace and to Lily's heart was becoming too great. But fate had other plans. On Friday afternoon, Ethan noticed a black SUV idling at the end of the block. It didn't belong in their neighborhood. The windows were tinted dark, and the engine hummed with the quiet power of a vehicle that cost more than Ethan's entire life. When he walked into the house, Arya was standing by the window, her hand gripping the curtain. She looked truly afraid for the first time. "Who are they, Arya?" Ethan asked, his voice firm. "The car. The way you're looking at it. What have you brought into my home?" Arya turned to him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Ethan, I need you to trust me for one more day. Just one. Please." Ethan looked at his daughter, who was playing on the floor. He looked at the woman who had brought order and warmth back into their lives. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Was she a victim, or was she the danger? Do you think Arya is a good person or someone dangerous? Tell us your theory below. Saturday morning arrived with a cold, biting wind. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating. Ethan hadn't slept, his mind racing through every dark possibility. He had his daughter's go-bag packed and hidden by the back door. He was a mechanic. He knew that when a system was under too much pressure, it was only a matter of time before it exploded. The explosion came in the form of a knock on the door at 10 a.m. Ethan moved Lily to the kitchen and opened the door. Standing on his porch were two men in tailored charcoal suits. They didn't look like police. They looked like predators who had been trained in Ivy League schools. "We're looking for a woman," the lead man said, holding up a high-resolution photograph. "She's been missing for 2 weeks. We tracked a signal to this coordinate." Ethan looked at the photo. It was Arya, but not the Arya who was currently wearing one of his old flannel shirts. This woman was dressed in a power suit that probably cost $10,000. She was standing in front of a glass skyscraper with the word Voss etched into the facade. "I haven't seen her," Ethan said, his voice flat. The man stepped closer, his eyes scanning the interior of the house. "Mr. Cole, we know you're a hardworking man. We know about your debts. There's a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return, $500,000. Ethan's heart hammered. That money would solve everything. It would pay for Lily's college, fix the garage, and give them a life of ease. But he remembered Arya's face by the window. He remembered the fear. He realized that these men weren't here to rescue her. They were here to capture her. "I told you," Ethan said, his hand gripping the door handle. "I don't know her. Get off my property." As the men walked back to their SUV, Ethan locked the door and turned around. Arya was standing in the hallway, her face pale. "You should have taken the money, Ethan," she whispered. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, his voice trembling with anger. "And why are people offering $500,000 to find you?" Arya took a deep breath. "My name is Arya Voss. I am the CEO of Voss International. 2 weeks ago, my board of directors, led by my own uncle, staged a coup. They tried to have me declared mentally unfit so they could liquidate the company's assets and sell the technology we've been developing to a foreign interest. They didn't just want my chair, Ethan. They wanted me gone, permanently." She explained how she had escaped a staged accident and realized she couldn't go to the police, many of whom were on her uncle's payroll. She had spent the last 2 weeks living as a ghost, trying to find a way to access her encrypted files and prove the fraud. "I didn't choose your porch by accident, Ethan," she admitted. "I had been watching you for a few hours. I saw you help an old man cross the street. I saw you give your last few dollars to a kid at the bakery. I needed to see if there was anyone left in this world who was real, anyone who wouldn't sell me out for a price." Ethan was stunned. He was a man who dealt in nuts and bolts, not corporate conspiracies and billionaire blood feuds. "You put my daughter in danger," he hissed. "I know," Arya said softly, "and for that, I can never apologize enough. But it's over now. They found me. I'll leave through the back." But it wasn't over. As Arya turned to go, the sound of screeching tires echoed in the driveway. The black SUV hadn't left. In fact, 2 more had joined it. Men began to surround the house. Lily ran from the kitchen, grabbing Ethan's leg. "Dad, what's happening?" Ethan looked at Arya. He looked at his daughter. He could give Arya up and hope the men would leave them alone. Or he could do what he had always taught Lily to do. Stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. He walked to the garage, grabbing a heavy iron tire iron and a flare gun. "Arya, get in the cellar with Lily, now!" "Ethan, you can't fight them!" Arya cried. "I'm not fighting them," Ethan said, his eyes hard as flint. "I'm holding the line. Go!" For the next 20 minutes, the small house became a fortress. Ethan used his knowledge of the structure to block the entry points. When the first man tried to breach the back window, Ethan met him with a glare and a weapon that said he had nothing left to lose. Suddenly, the air was filled with a different sound. Not the growl of SUVs, but the rhythmic thrum of rotors. A fleet of blue and white helicopters appeared over the tree line. The state police and a private security firm that Arya had finally managed to contact using Ethan's old laptop the night before. The men in the SUVs didn't wait to explain. They scrambled into their vehicles and sped away as the authorities landed in the street. The chaos subsided into a surreal silence. Ethan stood on his porch, his chest heaving. A tall man in a Navy suit stepped out of the lead helicopter and walked toward the house. He didn't look at Ethan. He looked at the door. "Ms. Voss!" he called out. Arya stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. She looked at Ethan, then at the man in the suit. Her posture shifted instantly. The shiver was gone. The flannel shirt she wore seemed to transform into a royal robe. "Report, Marcus," she commanded. "The evidence has been filed with the federal court, ma'am. Your uncle and the board members have been taken into custody. The company is secure. We've been searching for you for 72 hours." The neighborhood was paralyzed. Miller was standing in his yard, his mouth open. Arya turned to Ethan. The helicopters were kicking up a whirlwind of dust, but she didn't blink. "I needed to see something real," she said, her voice barely audible over the engines, "and I found it. Do you think Ethan should accept her help after this? Comment, trust, or leave." The transition was jarring. Within an hour, Ethan's quiet street was a command center. Arya was on 3 different phones, barking orders that moved markets on the other side of the planet. She was no longer the woman who toasted bread in his kitchen. She was a titan of industry. Ethan sat on his porch steps, feeling like a stranger in his own life. Lily sat beside him, watching the helicopters with wide eyes. "Is Arya a queen, Dad?" "Something like that, Lil," Ethan muttered. Arya approached them, her assistants keeping a respectful distance. She looked at Ethan's calloused hands, still gripping the tire iron. She knelt down so she was at eye level with him. "You kept me safe when I had nothing to give you," she said. "In my world, that is a miracle. My uncle thought everyone had a price. He thought he could buy my life, but you didn't even ask for my name before you gave me a blanket." Ethan looked at her. "I didn't do it for you, Arya. I did it because it's how we live. But you lied to us. You brought men with guns to the place where my daughter sleeps." "I did," Arya admitted, her voice heavy with regret. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure she is safe. But I need you to understand why I stayed. It wasn't just to hide, it was because, for the first time in 10 years, I felt like a human being. I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't a billionaire. I was just Arya, the woman who toasted the bread." The tension was broken by one of the suited men. "Ms. Voss, we need to leave. The press is descending on the city office." Arya stood up. She looked at the small, peeling house. She looked at the garage where Ethan spent his life. "This isn't the end, Ethan. I'm going back to reclaim my life, but I'm taking a piece of this house with me." Ethan watched as she climbed into the helicopter. As the blades began to spin, Arya looked through the window one last time. She didn't wave. She just placed her hand against the glass, right over where Lily was standing. Ethan felt a strange hollowness as the helicopters vanished into the blue sky. The neighbors slowly retreated into their homes. The SUVs were gone. The silence returned to the street, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a life that had been fundamentally altered. Ethan went into the kitchen. On the table where Arya had sat just hours before was a single envelope. Inside was no money, no check, just a small silver key and a handwritten note. "The garage you work for was owned by my uncle's subsidiary. I bought it this morning. It's yours now, Ethan. Not as a gift, but as a partnership. Because the world needs more people who know how to fix what's broken." Ethan sat in the quiet kitchen, the silver key gleaming in the light. He didn't feel like a rich man. He felt like a man who had finally seen the truth, that the greatest wealth isn't what you have in the bank, but who you are when the lights go out. Would you help her again, knowing the danger? Type help or walk away. 3 months later, the city was buzzing with the news of Arya Voss's triumphant return and the massive restructuring of her empire. But on the quiet street where Ethan lived, things stayed mostly the same. The garage now had a new sign, Cole and Voss Mechanical. It was the most advanced shop in the state, but Ethan still wore the same stained coveralls. He still worked on the neighborhood's old trucks, but now he did it without the weight of debt crushing his chest. Lily had a new tutor in a security detail that was so discreet Ethan hardly noticed them. But more importantly, she had her father back, the man who was no longer exhausted by the shadows of bills. One Saturday evening, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't an SUV, it was a modest, high-end electric vehicle. Arya stepped out. She wasn't wearing a suit. She was wearing jeans and a jacket that looked remarkably similar to the one she had arrived in on that rainy night. She walked up the porch steps. Lily ran out, throwing her arms around Arya's waist. Ethan stood in the doorway, a wrench in his hand. "The heater in my office is making a clicking sound," Arya said, a playful spark in her eyes. "I think I need a specialist." Ethan smiled, a real soul-deep smile. "I'm pretty expensive, Miss Voss." "I think I can afford it," she whispered. As they walked inside, the neighborhood watched. They still whispered, but the whispers had changed. They no longer talked about drifters or billionaires. They talked about the single dad who had opened his door to the rain and the woman who had finally found her way home. Ethan understood now that he hadn't saved a billionaire. He had simply helped a person. And in doing so, he had realized that while he spent his life fixing engines, it was the human heart that was the most powerful machine of all. The true value of a human being is never found in their outward circumstances. A billionaire can be as lost as a person on the street, and a humble mechanic can possess more power than a board of directors. Kindness is the only currency that never devalues. When you help someone without asking for a reward, you aren't just changing their life. You are reclaiming your own humanity. Never judge a book by its cover and never judge a guest by their coat. Because sometimes the person you think needs saving is the one who will eventually show you the way to your own freedom. If you believe that kindness is the greatest strength, comment respect below. Subscribe to Iron Dad's Stories for more powerful, heart-touching stories about the everyday heroes who remind us what truly matters. Thank you for watching.